everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So I wanted to talk about something that I've been meaning to get to from the finale, and that is what actually happened in the tunnel that they were going to, or that they were in actually on their way to London. I wanted to talk about some of the backstory that we actually got there and what that might mean for the future and how that could really connect a lot of things with what's happening with the overall story in terms of like a reunion and all that, because there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of places that they can actually go to here. And so, yeah, I do want to break down all of this. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. I will be doing my Q&A video tomorrow, so definitely go and join the Discord. The server name is Appetite for the Dead. I already asked for some questions. There's already a couple of questions there, so I will get into those questions for tomorrow. And yeah, I hope to see you guys there for the Q&A. But I had a few notes here, and I actually came across an article though this morning, which was, I'll leave a link down below to the article. Definitely go and check it out. It's by CBR, but they actually get into some really interesting stuff here that I do find very, very interesting. And so obviously the tunnel, they needed to take this tunnel in order to get to the UK. You know, in terms of the storyline coming out of nowhere in the finale, it definitely did, because I mean, I don't think they had the plan in episode 5 from what I remember anyways. At some point in the finale, they decided they had to go to London, and so that's where they were going. And we've been seeing a lot of like hints at what this was supposed to be, sort of, I guess, before the season even came out, you know, just like a lot of teasers of the bioluminescent walkers. And it seemed really interesting, but it was also really hard to make the connection to the super walkers and what was happening in France and everything with Madame Genet. And so what we actually learned in the finale was really interesting. So there were 2 survivors there, and they knew a lot about what happened, I guess, in the UK as the walker virus was, I guess, you know, first happening. Once the apocalypse first happened, a lot of places got completely ruined, but in the UK, they actually seem to have, you know, managed it quite well. And I think that's actually kind of interesting. So what we actually learned in the very last episode was that the UK actually locked down the entire place. And so that's why a lot of these tunnels were completely blocked off. I guess there was probably a couple of them, maybe, I'm not too sure, but there was at least one here. Maybe it's the only one, but basically this is how you would get there. And so they blocked everything off entirely. And so no one could escape. No one was able to, I guess, leave the UK or I guess enter, right? And so what's really interesting though, and I saw this here in the article here from CBR, but it says, as brutal as this sounds, it actually succeeded. From everything Angus and Fiona said, the United Kingdom is still functioning today. However, the wildfire virus outbreak was not a problem that could be solved by simply forcing civilians to remain in their homes. There was likely a lot of violence early in those early years as the military sought to stabilize the situation, and then it goes into a bunch of other stuff here. So I imagine that was sort of the issue, because yeah, based off of the season 3 trailer, we do see a newer character played by Stephen Merchant, and I mean, if you look at the place overall, it doesn't look like it's survived. Like, there's walkers everywhere, and so maybe, you know, initially they actually were able to sort of, I guess, you know, handle a little bit of the walker virus and whatnot in the very beginning, but eventually, you know, I guess everything just sort of, it turned into, you know, I guess what the rest of the world basically turned into, because I will say that's the thing, right, is everybody has the virus, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, you can sort of contain it to, you know, I guess outside of the UK. It's like, well, no, everyone has it. So if anyone dies, like, they're going to turn into a walker. So you're no matter what going to have walkers there, unless they were able to sort of, you know, manage that, which I don't think they were able to do, obviously. I think that, yeah, no matter what, that was going to be an issue. But it seems like, you know, at least in the very, very beginning here, that was something that they actually handled overall pretty well, I would say. And so the article goes into a bunch of other things here, which I would overall, I guess, disagree with, which is just, you know, how the government likely survived there and everything. And it goes into this whole other thing here, which is like definitely, I guess, very possible. But I just think that, you know, based off of what we saw in the season 3 trailer, it's not that likely. But the one thing that I really do like, and it's this idea that, you know, in London, well, that's the thing. If you look at the trailer for episode 3, you know, they're all going to London right now. And so you got to be wondering, like, well, why? Well, obviously they're trying to get back home. And so it looks like they do find a boat or something. This one part of the article here is really interesting, in which it does actually talk about the fact that, you know, maybe they've reached out to Canada and whatnot. And, you know, the fact that there are boats, I guess, going back and forth, like ships and whatever, you know, I don't really know the reason, but like maybe there is some sort of old government that is there. And maybe that's why Daryl and Carol are going there. You know, obviously a lot of this stuff we'd have to learn. I don't think they're going to necessarily get into a lot of this in season 3, though I guess I could see it since the very first episode is taking place there in London. So maybe that's how Daryl and Carol eventually, you know, end up, I guess, you know, back home in America. Like they're eventually going to get this ship. Obviously something's going to go wrong though, and they end up in Spain. And so maybe it's, I mean, I don't know, maybe they encounter another ship out there, or maybe it's a storm or something like that, right? Like there could be a lot of different reasons here. And so what I find really interesting here though is just the fact that Gimple is actually really expanding the world overall here. And that's the one thing that I just found really, really interesting in terms of, you know, this very last scene in the finale here, because that was really what the tunnel, I guess, was designed to do, was to basically keep people out, but also keep people within, I guess, London and whatnot, right? And so I think that going into, you know, the very first episode of season 3 here, to learn a lot more here, like, obviously we know at this point that the military, like, they're not around anymore. They're definitely, I mean, that's the thing, who knows? Like, maybe we learn a lot of stuff in the very first episode, and there's actually, you know, there's some places around the world that actually have survived. And I mean, that's the thing too, is it gets into a whole other thing in terms of the way, you know, the Walker virus has sort of affected everyone, because I think the fact that everyone has the virus, like, you know, because in all zombie movies or like TV shows and whatnot, like usually it's basically like, you know, you only have the virus if you get bit by a zombie, basically, right? But with The Walking Dead, everyone has it. So if you die by just whatever, you're going to turn to a walker. So like, I understand, I guess, what they tried to do in the very beginning in terms of blocking off, you know, the tunnel and everything. And maybe it helped out somewhat, but no matter what, people were going to turn. But that's what I find really interesting about that whole idea. And I don't know if Gimple's ever going to get into that, because that's the whole thing when it comes to like the Walker origins. Obviously, we learned in season 2 that it may have likely been France that started all of this. So it's very possible that that's the direction that they're going in. You know, some people thought that maybe it was aliens, or maybe it was like this or that. But I feel like, you know, with what we learned in season 2, Madame Genet said, you know, that the monsters they created, or the monsters they made, I think is exactly what she said, which was a reference to the government at the time, right? And I guess what they did, this and that. And so I don't know if she knew something or if that was sort of her interpretation of everything, but it's really interesting because you start to get into everything else here, and you just got to wonder how everything started, because it wasn't there before and now it's there, right? And again, it's something that I don't know if Gimple's ever going to want to really get into, because he didn't even really want to get into the whole Super Walker stuff, but David Zabel was like, well, we got to do it. And, you know, obviously they did it and it was awesome, even though I don't like how the story ended. It was really exciting in season 1, and the scenes were pretty cool in season 2. So I think that's the whole thing about it, is the Walker origin is such a fascinating take on zombies, I would say, in the apocalypse, because there's just a lot of explanations that you can really give for like how everything started. And I don't know where they're going to go overall. I don't know if Gimple's ever going to want to get into it, but you know, there's at least some hints right now. There's at least some stuff coming out right now. So, you know, maybe he's actually a little more open to getting into some of that information here, because it is really interesting. It is fascinating. And I think if it's done really well, it still really does overall, you know, fit within the Walking Dead universe here, because I know that that's something that, you know, for the longest time, no one really wanted to get into, was like, you know, how walkers were created and all of that, because it just got too sci-fi, where this show was more, you know, it's more realistic. It's more just on the survival aspect, and, you know, it's more focused on the characters, and it doesn't really get into stuff like that, which I do think that, yes, that is what makes The Walking Dead very important and very different from a lot of other shows and a lot of other, you know, zombie shows or movies. So I do agree to keep a lot of that in, but I just think that with the spin-offs and where you're building to overall, I think it's important to sort of explain some of that, get into some of it here to make an overall story, because no matter what, in the end, like, they're not going to be curing anything. I think that's sort of the difference here, is like finding out the origin and stuff, I think is fine. The issue that I think you would get into is finding a cure and all of that, right? Like, if you actually found a cure, then there's no more Walking Dead, right? So that's kind of an issue. I think you could play with the idea of maybe trying to find one, and then obviously doesn't work out or whatever. But I think actually finding a cure would be something that it would end The Walking Dead. And I don't think they want to do that. But in terms of an overall end game story that you can build to, some stuff with the origin and all that I think would be really exciting here. And, some of what the plan is for the future. I think that's why people really liked the CRM storyline, because it really seemed like we were going in a direction like that. But as we're going farther away from that, I think I can see what Gimple is trying to set up here a little bit more. And so we'll have to wait and see where this is going to go. Obviously, overall, I think that the military being set up in that tunnel was really interesting. I mean, honestly, that episode is probably my favorite episode of the season for sure, because I just really enjoyed a lot of the character stuff there and a lot of some of the backstory and whatnot. And I will say I'm going to be doing a video on this probably tomorrow or maybe later on today or like the next day. I'm not entirely sure. But The Walking Dead actually teased something here that was really interesting. They're promoting The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 2 in terms of, well, now you can watch it on AMC Plus, like all episodes. But it's really interesting because they shared a poster of Cadron and it says he's missing. And it's like, have you seen this man? Last seen heading into the tunnel towards the United Kingdom. He may still be in there. And that's really interesting because if the character was just gone, like, why would you share anything like that, right? Like, if the character story was over, like, to me, I think that kind of confirms that the character is likely going to return, that, it's not the ending of Cadron. And that's smart because otherwise there would be questions forever. Like, that's the one thing with a lot of characters in the past that have just gone missing. Like, they never really want to go back and like explain the story entirely. And so you just get these questions forever and ever and ever and ever of just like, what happened to this person? What happened to this person? So really cool to see that. And yeah, that was a really fascinating storyline in the finale here. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this a little bit more in depth here and talk about, what that storyline in the finale likely teased about season 3 or I guess future storylines. And so yeah, I'm gonna leave it here. Definitely post all your thoughts down below. I hope you all enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.